All right. This is going to be really easy.
This all makes sense in my head, and I think it makes sense coming out, but it might just be like a jumbled mess.
Let's get it.
Hey guys, this is Austin,
This is Matt.
and this is Clearly Overthinking. A little bit nerdy.
And a lot of bit wordy.
Let's do it. So today's episode, we are talking about hills we will die on. Some of them are a little silly. Some of them are a little bit more serious, but even the silly ones, we could probably have a pretty serious conversation about. So we've got a whole list of them. I think we'll just sort of make our way through them and see how far we get.
Yeah, dude. Up number one for Austin. If you were to like stop me in the middle of the road and just ask me, what do you think people's like top 3 hills they would die on? I would say like probably politics, religion, like what we're about to talk about would be the literal last thing.
But it's one of my biggest pet peeves by far.
Store entrance and exits.
Yeah, and the shopping
And
cart
cart returns.
theory. Yeah. So I think a hill I would die on is I genuinely believe you can get a pretty good idea if a person is decent or indecent based on if they use the correct entrance and exit at Walmart, as well as putting their shopping cart back in the cart corral. I mean, I think that it's very simple social mores to follow. And so I don't understand why people need to go out of their way, or they feel like going out of their way, walking 5 more feet to the right, is such a big inconvenience to them that they can't just go with the flow of traffic through the door that specifically says entrance, so that way you don't inconvenience someone else.
You just want conformists. That's all you want, dude.
Look, you can argue that all you want. I'm just saying life is simpler when you're not an overt poop head.
Yeah, okay. I gotta wonder though, tell me your thoughts on people who not only don't return their carts, but they're putting them on those little, you know, those like little medium deals where like the, like would have like a shrubbery or like a tree.
Oh yeah,
and
like
then,
they go out of their
park it
way
on
of
top.
getting them in the mulch. Yeah.
What do you think about
I mean,
that, dude?
come on. That's even worse, frankly, because you went through all the effort of lifting it up over the curb to get it in the little flower bed or whatever. And so I just don't, at that point, you're really trying to make the cart corral staff have a harder day. I mean,
Is that why you don't like it? Or is it more of like, you legitimately are like, man, if this person's going to put their cart there, they're probably going to cheat on their taxes.
look, all I'm saying is this is the big overarching theme of this hill that I would die on. If you consider yourself a decent person, but you don't return your cart to the cart corral, you should not consider yourself a decent person, because it's a very simple thing that you can follow. I mean, there have been 0 instances of my life where I was too busy or had too much going on that I couldn't take an additional minute and a half to walk the cart to the cart corral. Now, I'm not saying that I'm a perfect person. I've got plenty of issues, but I'm just saying, like, even this argument of like, well, they pay people to go collect them. Yeah, they paid them to go get them from the cart corral. You are making their job harder by stranding them in the parking lot.
Do you feel like, how do you feel about people that don't use their blinkers? Is that up there with this kind of thing? Or is that like,
I mean, that doesn't bother me as much, but I also think that that's a pretty simple social mores to follow. I also think that and look, police officers have plenty to do, so I'm not saying they need to be pulling everyone over for these minor traffic violations.
Okay.
But if cops are not going to consistently enforce that, then it shouldn't even be a law, in my opinion. I mean, if you're not going to enforce the issue, then don't even.
But what if there's no law about returning carts?
So this is the shopping cart theory, is that it's the ultimate sign of whether a person is inherently good or inherently bad, because there is no reward for returning it. There's no punishment for not returning it. And so you are literally just returning it because inherently you feel it is the right thing to do. And if you don't return it,
You're a terrible person.
Well, essentially you've got inherently selfish desires. Like, you are okay with like being so unwilling to help other people by conveniently placing the cart where all the carts go. look, I'm not trying to like rattle cages here,
I mean,
except I
you're
kind of
rattling
am.
everyone's cages. Yeah.
Except I kind of am.
Yeah,
So
no.
if you consider yourself a decent person and you're listening to this, I hope the next time you go grocery shopping, you really think about, am I going to put this cart corral back? Yes, I am.
If you consider
And if
yourself
suddenly
a
there's
decent
more,
person,
if suddenly there's more carts not going to the cart corral, I'm going to assume we have a really large audience and we're massively successful.
Dude, honestly, but it's kind of funny that I feel like you get worked up about this, but
It's stupid. I
mean,
know. Okay.
but it can. I mean, it kind of. I guess it does kind of make sense in a simple like, if you don't do the small things, are you trustworthy to do like the larger things?
Yeah, exactly. So this is a conversation I literally had with a patient yesterday. Because I brought this up. This patient and I always have these like ridiculous, in-depth conversations. And he was kind of teasing me because he's like, you know, that there are people like burning down Tesla factories and like there's a war going on in Ukraine. And my argument back to him is like, yeah, and I live in Farmington, Arkansas, so I have a much better chance of having an impact on my community and my like trying to get my community to be a little bit more decent in terms of humanity than I do stopping the war in Ukraine and keeping people from burning. Like I have a much better shot at actually having an impact on my community, and this more consistently affects me on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, sure.
So not that I'm saying that we all need to conform to what just
No, that's
affects
exactly
Austin,
what you're
but
saying, though.
Shut up.
What you're saying is, if you ever think about even considering leaving the cart in the middle of the road, I'll tell you this. I don't really get that worked up, except for, do you ever have those moments where you're going in a parking lot and you see that one space that's open and you go to turn in and someone just put a cart like far enough in the parking spot that you couldn't see it when you were turning, but
so
that's pretty annoying.
Yeah, so here's what I was thinking about. So if I can't trust people in my community to have the decency to just follow simple rules on signs, how could I trust any of them to help me in an emergent situation? Like, let's say I'm walking across the parking lot with my daughter and like a car hits her and I'm trying to tend to her. Like, how can I trust any of them to do something because really it's a bigger inconvenience for you to have to call 911 because now when you call 911, they're going to be searching for the person that called 911 like when they arrive and all this stuff. And so it's like, it's more inconvenient to do something big like that than it is to literally just follow the sign on the door.
Yeah. Well, it's also like the bystander effect.
Yeah, 100%.
So like, I think you also have reason to believe that people wouldn't help because of that. They'd be like, someone else is going to call the ambulance.
Sure. But I mean, if I had faith that people were more decent in my community, then maybe that wouldn't be as big of a concern for me. I don't know. So I guess all I can do is try to be the person that I would hope other people would be. And
you should test this theory out. And next time you see someone leaving their car, just run up to them and be like,
have you seen those TikTok videos of the YouTube channel? Right now? That YouTube channel of the cart police, and he like puts magnets and stuff on people's like little suction cup flags on their cars whenever they leave the cart, and then they get out and they are pissed. Yeah. They're like, "Don't touch my effing car!" Yeah, and they're like trying to fight this dude.
Proportionally, like a cart is like $10, and you're like, "I'm gonna put this thing that." On your $50,000 vehicle.
Well, like, yeah, but it's literally just like it's literally it's like a decal magnet that just says like cart police or something on it. And so you're just like infraction or something. So it's not like something that's damaging the car. It's literally something. It's just being a troll, like following people around.
I feel like you are for this.
I thought it was hilarious. I think it's super hilarious. I also think that if people are going to make a big deal about, a person getting worked up about carts not getting returned, then why make a big deal about someone putting a decal magnet on your car?
I guess that's fair. Well, you know what else gets me worked up though?
Tell me, what's the first hill you would die on?
Paper straws are the ultimate virtue signal.
Tell me
They're
about
the worst. That. I mean, I think even the people that thought these up were sitting there like, man, this is a great alternative. And then they tried it once and they all kind of like gritted their teeth and like, yeah, this is such a good alternative. Like nobody who's ever used a paper straw has been like, wow, this is such a great mouthfeel. Well, I love the feeling of it disintegrating on my lips. So
what's
I'm drinking.
Interesting about that is that they didn't even try to give some sort of like impermeable coating on it so that way it didn't fall to pieces.
Yeah.
The only thing, obviously you don't want to coat it in plastic because that's kind of counterproductive to what they're trying to do, but Like, you know how, do you guys have Culligan water tanks at JB Hunt or anywhere in your life? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No idea at all.
Okay, so it's literally one of those giant water tanks, like the water cooler, like the stereotypical office water cooler. You know what I'm talking about?
I do, and we don't.
Okay, so Culligan provides cups that are coated in wax, so that way the water can't soak through them.
Is it like the paper ones that like wax on the inside?
Yeah, and on the outside too.
Oh, okay.
And so if you like run your fingernail along them, you can peel the wax off. So, but they don't even do that with the straws. And the only thing that makes sense is that they were worried about, like, what if the boxes get caught in the heat and the wax melts off the straws? But
yeah.
What has been your most recent encounter with a paper straw?
I mean, it's not very common, to be honest with you, but it's also because I feel like we live in Arkansas and there's still like the rebel spirit, you know, like
what was your first encounter with a paper straw? Do you remember?
I don't even know, but we recently were in Florida and it was like, we had to it was like impossible to find a plastic straw. Literally just bought some from Walmart and we're carrying them around because it was just, it's just so weird. I mean, I guess in one sense, it's like the perfect first world problem because you can just not use a straw. You know? Like you could just
like you are with your Starbucks right now.
Yeah, exactly. You know, there's nothing about it that requires to have a straw. But when I do feel like it's required, like when I do have something, like maybe you're at the restaurant or whatever, and they give you the straws, whatever, and you put it in your water, like just something about the lifelong training of having a plastic straw and then you put a paper one in your mouth. It's just like revulsive, almost like you instantly are like, ugh, you know, just because of the feeling. So
that's
maybe it's a texture thing.
So this kind of spurs on another question for me. Like, why do you have to have a straw at all?
I mean, I guess you don't. But why do you have to take back carts, dude? You don't. There's no law. There's no law to take back your carts.
Yeah, but that's not the same at all. That is not the same.
I mean, there's a law for paper straws in some places. I mean,
well, sure, but I'm saying that the two concepts are different. Where like, if they just stopped producing paper straws, you're not creating more work for anyone else. If you stop returning your cart to the cart corral, you are creating more work. You're creating a greater inconvenience. And to sit there and say like, well, they got to earn their paycheck. All of us are trying to be lazier, so don't sit there and say that people need to work harder to earn their paycheck.
I mean, I understand what you're saying.
Okay, sorry, I kind of got back to my thing.
No, it's all good, dude.
But yeah, I don't know, man. I think we're just too obsessed with straws. Like girls have to have their cups that have straws in them.
Yeah,
and
you hear that, girls?
I remember when Yeti's, like the 32-ounce cups came out and the lid, literally, it was just a sipper lid. And then all of a sudden it was like, no, I didn't realize how much girls want a straw.
Well, I will say that I like a straw. I'm not going to say it's just girls, but I say that because I just had a Stanley Cup the other day full of water. And I thought to myself, this is so nice and refreshing. And I think there's like something about the volume of like how much you can drink with a straw. It's like significantly more if you don't.
You'd have to show me the science on that.
I'm almost positive I heard that one point where it's like you can drink more faster.
Taking more air when you drink without a straw?
I don't know. I just think there's like more happening. I don't know.
That sounds about as logical as when people say you get drunk faster if you drink beer through a straw.
I mean, hey, but I thought what I was going to say is I think the experience of drinking ice cold water through a straw is great.
I think the only time it seems most practical is like when you're traveling. Like if you're in the car, it's more convenient to have like a lidded cup with a straw. But like if I'm just at the office, I don't think it really bothers me. I mean, I will say this. I do have a water bottle, and water bottles just have like built-in straws in them anyway. Even if you just think about like the old sports Gatorade water bottles, like basically a straw.
What's number 2 for you, dude?
Oh, dude, it starts to get pretty serious here. So I am a physical therapist, as we know, based on episode 1. I am a firm believer that one of the biggest pitfalls of our medical system is that we have no idea what anything costs when we go to the doctor. And there are cases. So I was just talking to someone today.
Why is that?
Why is it that we don't have prices on things? Like I can't.
Like, let me ask you this, because you work in it, so you probably would be able to answer it pretty accurately. If I were to go to the same hospital, let's say your hospital, and I'm doing the exact same thing, do I at least have the confidence that it's going to be the same price? Or is there a chance that like,
I don't know
based
that
on
you
how
can.
It's rung up and everything?
I don't know that you can. So here is how insurance or how insurance interacting with the healthcare system works. So I go to the hospital, let's say to get a hip replacement. So there's all sorts of fees associated with that, and like surgical fees, equipment fees, hospitalization if I had to stay at all. And so basically all of the surgeon would essentially tell the hospital what his billing rate was, like what he feels he deserves. And then the hospital sends that bill to insurance. And it's going to, like, let's just say it says something like $40,000. The hospital sends that bill knowing full well they're not going to get $40,000. And maybe the reason they're asking $40,000 is so that insurance will be like, oh, okay, we'll give you 10.
Almost like a car salesman kind of vibe.
Pretty much. Except whatever the counteroffer is from insurance is what goes. And then if the hospital decides, well, they didn't pay enough, then the rest is put on the patient.
That's kind of crazy.
I'm not saying that they would be like, oh, well, insurance only paid 10 grand, so now the patient owes us $30,000. But let's say that they were like, well, we were hoping to land at like 12. So now, your insurance covered at 10,000, and so now there's still 2,000 that needs to be left.
But is it one of those things where like you could get the same insurance, same person, but different hospitals doing completely different negotiations, so like different outcomes?
I would think that would have to do if there's a difference. Now, I don't know. This is kind of untreaded territory for me because I don't work in the surgical or the hospital setting.
Yeah.
But it would probably depend on if there are standards set for like what a surgeon could actually bill.
See, I think I remember hearing something along those lines where like there was more or less like contracts that are negotiated between the insurance and the hospital, and like that could be different between different hospitals.
And what's interesting too is that like doctors have, or surgeons in particular, they have rights to practice at different facilities. So like in Northwest Arkansas, like I don't know that this is true, but there might be a surgeon that like he does some surgeries out of Washington Regional, and then maybe he does other surgeries out of like Northwest or something like that. I don't know. But it's not uncommon for surgeons to be like, they're not technically a employee of the hospital. They are their own entity, and they have rights to do procedures at certain
That's pretty crazy.
facilities.
And so I guess that also plays into like why doctors have to have insurance, like malpractice.
I'm pretty sure though, like with like Mercy Hospital, that's like if you're a doctor with Mercy, like that's your employer. I don't think it's a rights kind of thing.
Word.
But so there are cases though where like I was just talking to someone recently about this, where he had a friend who had a procedure done at a hospital, and he got billed with the assumption that they were going to be billing his insurance. They sent him a bill for $1,600 because he hadn't met his deductible. His insurance had actually lapsed, and the hospital did not have that information that his insurance had lapsed. So when he called them and said, hey, I actually don't have insurance, I need to know what I'm going to have to pay you guys because I don't have insurance. And they gave him a bill for $600, which means that he actually paid less to have his procedure done at the hospital because he didn't have insurance.
That's crazy.
And so that's one of the main reasons that I think, now the healthcare system does a lot of illogical things, and the pessimist in me says they do it this way because it's good for someone, just not for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like in this case, it's good for someone that you don't know what things cost, but not for you. Because if you're the guy that walks in and you get charged $1,000 more, literally just because that's what your insurance policy dictates, then you had no idea that you could have saved $1,000 if you'd have just asked the hospital what the cash price was and don't bill my insurance.
Yeah.
But they won't tell you that. I mean, unless you literally have no insurance, if you ask them, like, can you tell me roughly what I'm going to have to pay? They will say, well, we can try to give you an estimate, but we have to run it through your insurance, and then we won't know for sure until after we see what your insurance covers.
Dang.
And that's because they're asking these ungodly numbers with the knowledge that they're not going to get that. And
that's just so crazy that
so
it even
stupid.
works.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
It's so dumb. But it's beneficial for someone that we, the common people, don't know what services actually cost. But if you go do anything at a hospital and you tell them you want a cash price, they can give you a cash price. They just don't publicize that.
That's just crazy, though.
Mm-hmm.
I think this plays into my next hill that I die on, and that insurance is just a scam, dude. Like,
for sure,
I understand the need for it, and more of a car sense, for instance, because like
Yeah.
you're operating a super giant machine vehicle and you're traveling at like 70 miles an hour, maybe more. And if something happens, like you want to have some sort of insurance to cover the cost of the damage to another person's vehicle or your own, or whatever might happen as like a health result of that or whatever. That makes sense because like you're kind of deliberately putting yourself in a situation that's inherently dangerous, but you don't really think about that as you're driving. Like you don't really consider the fact that like, because a lot of times you're so used to it, you're just like zoning out, listening to like radio or an audiobook. But you're like traveling in this little death machine of a can that like if it hits something at high speeds, it'd do a lot of damage. You know, like you don't really think about that. And so I have a little bit more kind of understanding of the necessity of insurance for cars, but I don't see how, like for even things like homeowners insurance, like I just don't understand how that can be an industry where we have something so vital to someone's life. Maybe you could say health insurance as well. I mean, not maybe, like you for sure would say health insurance as well, where a whole industry is based on something so important to someone's life that like, and the fact that it's not always very clear why the prices are going up or how they're dictating. Like I was talking to a coworker of mine the other day, and it's like homeowners insurance is going up, and the reasonings was like, oh, well, the natural disasters are kind of high from like year over year or whatever. And it's like, well,
things that's completely beyond our control.
Yeah. And that's also super illogical because it's not like when there's not natural disasters, I can then demand a discount on my homeowner's insurance. Like it doesn't work in reverse.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that it makes sense that on sort of like a merit-based system that like, well, so for instance, my car started on fire in my garage and it caught my garage on fire.
I totally forgot about that.
I had to file an insurance claim. Now, thankfully the house didn't burn down, but there was extensive like smoke damage and stuff to the garage itself. And I had to make an insurance claim. Now, was it my fault that my garage caught on fire? I mean, I think anyone would be hard pressed to make that argument. However, statistically speaking, it's happened to me once. So maybe that makes me a little bit more risky. So it would make sense that on a merit-based system, just by having to file an insurance claim, maybe they would up my rates a little bit. Yeah. But just because like, well, you know, we're having to cover, you know, across the country, more tornadoes are happening or more hurricanes are happening. And so, well, I live in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas. So how many houses have you had to cover because of natural disasters here? Yeah.
And I think where it kind of gets me is like, we were, you know, just talking about health insurance. And I think what kind of irritates me is that, you know, you mentioned that it's good for someone, just not for you. And that's how like insurance, it's almost like what they do with collateral debt obligations with mortgages and stuff, where they take more risky ones and they bundle them with ones that are less risky. And it's kind of the same with insurance. Like you have people that are probably super healthy and they'll never need to go to the doctor. And they probably also just have a habit of not going to the doctor maybe. Like preventative care is probably not our strong suit in America.
No, and that's another thing we could totally go off on another tangent on, but whatever.
But like that being the case, you have these situations where someone's basically paying for another person's unhealthy lifestyle. So the cost that the insurance is incurring is mostly from that subset of the population that needs to use health insurance all the time, or you know what I mean, that happens to live in California where everything's catching on fire, whatever that looks like. Like there just is this way of them diffusing risk to all these other populations that maybe aren't inherently risky. And so in that way, it's like you're paying for these things that you don't necessarily take advantage of or use. But then this is where I really get amped up about insurance, is like when you most need it, then all of a sudden the insurer's job is to basically not pay. Like, it's, I mean, in a perfect world, right? You pay for it. You have this agreed upon terms and conditions. And when you need to use insurance, you just go through the channels, you know, you file the paperwork and it works. Right. But it's like the job of the insurer to minimize costs to them and minimize like liability and obligations. And so happens all the time in car insurance, where it's like everyone's trying to get out of paying everything, even though you pay for insurance regularly. And it's, you know, a huge big deal if you don't have insurance. But then when you try to use it, then it's like your insurer who's putting all these commercials on about like being the good neighbor and all this stuff. It's like their job is to literally minimize the amount of money they have to pay out, because that's how they make their profits. And that
and I think the thing that makes that incident you're just talking about the most believable, like that's probably one of the most believable arguments you could make in terms of saying car insurance is a scam is the fact that it is illegal to not have it if you operate a vehicle. Like, you are literally required by law. If you want to operate a vehicle, you are required by law to carry car insurance. And so you would think that that would mean, because I'm legally bound to have it, there has to be some sort of legal obligation of the entity to pay out when accidents happen. And it doesn't.
Yeah, it's absolutely nuts. And I'm
So
not
they're
saying
guaranteed. They're guaranteed a paycheck.
Yeah, and I think like people sometimes will rail against all this stuff, and they'll be like, well, what's your alternative? Would you just have them like, go out of business and all this stuff? And it's like, no, I'm just saying that it seems completely illogical to me to have a whole business structure that's set upon these principles of trying to make money from people paying you and then not giving services. I mean, that's literally what we're talking about. We're talking about an insurance company that will make money by not having to spend money for services, whether that's repairing or whatever. So that just blows my mind. And I think the scammy part of it is, like you were saying, when it's,
Same thing with health insurance. We're legally bound to have it.
That's what
essentially.
Well, I was going to say is like, you don't have it, you're screwed. But also, like, if you didn't have homeowners insurance, you'd never get qualified for a loan. You know what I mean? Or, for some reason, maybe you didn't have a mortgage and you'd paid everything off and there was no absolute necessity to have homeowners insurance. Like, if something were to happen, then you'd be absolutely screwed. So it's like, you don't have to, but it's always in this kind of state of obligation where, like, you're obligated to have these things as just like bare minimum living, subsisting in the world. You got to have these things. And that seems like a really scummy thing to build a business model off of, especially if they're like incorporated. I know some insurance companies aren't. They have like more of what do they call them? I think they're like, I think it's like a mutual,
like Liberty Mutual or something like that. That's what I was thinking. But.
Yeah. Where they're not like a for-profit, or they don't have shareholders. That's what it is. That's what that basically means, is they don't have shareholders. So they're not like beholden to.
So it's literally like a pool of money then. Yeah. Like everyone that pays into it like has like a community pool, and they just draw out of that one.
Yeah. And that's very different than they think. And what I would say is, like, I'd go as far as to say, like, I would love for the government to start putting down rules on like where we want to say that things should be profitable. And I think this is really hard to do in the insurance realm because of all the political fighting around it and the lobbying and all that stuff. But like, it would be really great if we could just as a society be like, hey, there's nothing wrong with having a business, and there's nothing wrong with having a business that makes money even, but there's something inherently wrong with a business that has shareholders that are expecting a year-over-year return on your people that you're supposed to be providing coverage for. Right. And so then that de-incentivizes you to do the very thing you're supposed to pay for. Like, it's very different, in my opinion, than other businesses, where these businesses are trying to maximize efficiency. They're like, okay, well, we can sell it for this much less and still make the same amount of money because, or we can, pay this much less for the materials and do it for this much less until we can get the little margin of efficiency, and we can turn it into like a return for shareholders. For me, I feel like that's more respectable than when you're looking out at people who maybe need you to cover their bills for health insurance. And you're like, man, if we cover that, that's a good like $200,000 that we're going to have to pay. And that's going to directly hurt our bottom line. It's like, you're not talking about whether or not you're going to make, some more money for someone who went into, the retail business deliberately for this reason. Instead, you're talking about making money for people that went into a business that shouldn't be a business. It shouldn't be, insurance shouldn't be a business proper in that sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally understand.
I don't know.
I agree with you there.
That's kind of my thoughts on insurance as a scam.
So what do you think about life insurance? Because I feel like in some ways, maybe life insurance is, or at least term life insurance is maybe the least scammy that there can be. Because essentially, like, if I sign a term life insurance policy, I'm betting, essentially what's happening is they're betting against the fact, like, let's say it's on a 15-year term. They're betting against the fact that I'm going to die in the next 15 years. And I'm betting for the fact, I shouldn't say fact, I'm betting for the possibility that I die in the next 50 years. And they're betting against the possibility. So there's a potential that, like, just literally just as a safeguarding mechanism, that in case I die in the next 15 years or whatever, that I'm going to pay into it, and if 15 years pass and I don't have to, redeem that policy, then I just lost a bunch of money, but that was the gamble. I knew what
Yeah.
the gamble was.
I don't know enough about it to like really speculate with any kind of accuracy, but I think I'm more open to that. And I'm also more open to that because I don't think there's as much of a burden on the individual. So like, I think my life insurance is like $8.
Right.
You know what I mean?
So
It's
it's
like-
mostly, but like in that case, is it through your employer?
Yeah.
So it's mostly, the bill is mostly footed by the employer then, right? Because we're only
I'm almost positive.
We're getting charged pretty
Yeah.
low.
I think
for-
on your W-2, they'll even show you kind of the amount of coverage
Yeah,
that your employer spends,
gotcha.
which is significant. And
Yeah.
I also think that's another reason to like try to get a hold on insurance because, you know, point 5B on why insurance is a scam. It's so inextricably linked to your employment that to not have employment
Oh yeah.
is to not have insurance.
Yep.
And so you basically are in a situation where if we take, for instance, one of the most expensive elements of life, which is why you have insurance, is healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
We tie healthcare almost directly with employment such that if you're not employed, you're not worth the effort or the value of trying to cover
Yeah.
because I mean, you know, it's just, you're just totally screwed. And I don't know how I land on all the nationalized healthcare, but I do think for sure there has to be some sort of like reform or some sort of like boundaries we're willing to put on insurance that basically allows us to get away from the strong coupling of insurance with employment. Because I think also on my more pessimistic days, I think employers know that there's this really strong relationship and they utilize this against employees. So one of the reasons why there's not as much desire to like say invest in your employees, to retain them, to even maybe potentially build a culture that like really supplements your learning and all this stuff. Like, I think part of the reason companies don't do that is because they're already like, our investment to you is your insurance. And we also know that when you leave this company and go to another company, you're just basically footing your own insurance for 30 days, right? Or whatever the timeline is to
Right.
get eligible for insurance
Right.
again. And I think that's, I tend to be more optimistic, and companies that I work for that are, you know, maybe Fortune 500, but really try to prioritize employees and work-life balance. So I wouldn't necessarily say my company does this, but I do think every company has a natural understanding that they have this leverage on their employees.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
Some really do.
And I
leverage it.
I mean, I run into this all the time with the population of patients that I serve. Like, let's say that I see a patient who has had a stroke and it's substantial enough that they have to go on short-term disability and then long-term disability. And then eventually, you know, it gets to the point where like maybe they won't recover well enough that they can be functional enough to do their job or return to their job. So at a certain point, the company stops covering your insurance. You can still have access to the insurance if you pay for what's called COBRA. But then essentially what happens is your insurance goes from, let's say it was like, I don't know, $300 a month. It jumps up to like $700 a month because now you're covering what the employer was paying for to keep your coverage. And so now you're footing the whole bill. Well, you don't have a job. You don't have a job. So how are you going to pay $700 a month for your insurance?
Yep.
And so I totally agree. The fact that it's tied to your job, when bad things happen, it's not good.
Yeah.
It's really not good. And with the way that reimbursement happens or coverage happens with like Medicaid programs, personally, I think Medicaid is pretty insufficient when it comes to what kind of coverage they provide. And a lot of healthcare facilities won't even take Medicaid because of the inconsistency of reimbursement. So
yeah, I mean, I would even be interested to see what the numbers are on the amount of like revenue that the healthcare system in particular generates on inefficiency, not just on the lack of transparency with prices, not just on the variable contracts between hospitals and insurances, but also on the basic underlying premise that people cannot afford health insurance. And so in other words, I'd love to see what the kind of underbelly of the market, all these debt collecting companies that basically their primary targets are people who don't pay their health bills. And these hospitals are taking all this stuff and just selling their debt for super cheap because they know, yeah, you might owe $6,000 for this hospital because of, you know, how much you didn't have covered on insurance, or maybe you didn't have insurance or whatever. But they're like, yeah, we can sell this for like $1,000 to this debt. And the debt collector's really taking a gamble because he's like, I don't know, this person might just file for bankruptcy.
Well,
rather
you
than
know what else is
actually
funny
pay this.
with debt collectors, with health insurance in particular? They like hospitals, healthcare facilities, they cannot sell information regarding what the service was. And so if they can't tell, like if the debt collection agency can't actually pin a service on you, technically that debt doesn't exist once they have it. So if they call you and they say, hey,
you've heard it from a doctor.
So I know this is probably sketchy and look into it more, but basically if a debt collection agency calls you because of a healthcare bill,
I mean,
you could essentially deny because they don't know what that debt is for. And the only way HIPAA, they will know is if you tell them what it was.
So it sounds like essentially like when you, I don't know, I've heard people that like have interacted with hospitals and they give them an invoice for something and they come back, they're like, give me an itemized, like I want to know what the invoice is specifically. And it's kind of the same where they're like, oh, we're not quite sure. And then all of a sudden it dramatically drops. You know, it sounds like almost a similar situation, but even more so because you're protected by law.
You're protected by HIPAA.
Yeah. So it's like, you can just tell them the same thing and they're like, well, yeah.
Yeah. You could basically deny that service ever happened and they don't have any proof except that they have a thing that says Austin Miller owed this much. They don't have any proof that you actually owe anything.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good one. Next in the list, bro.
Okay, yeah. So a big reason, this is kind of a long one. So a big reason the cost of higher education has skyrocketed since our grandparents' day is because the government has all but guaranteed to give colleges and universities any amount they ask for because they have subsidized giving loans to 18-year-olds who don't have to provide any evidence that they will be capable of paying those things back. And so essentially a university could say, Johnny, at 18 years old, it's going to cost you 20 grand. And then the Johnny turns to the government in his application to federal student aid, says, hey, they say I need 20 grand. And the government's like, okay, it's 20 grand. And then the next year, maybe the university says, oh, well, that was easy to get 20 grand. It's going to be 30 grand this year. You know, cost of services goes up every year, inflation, but it's not consistent with inflation by any means. That's why our grandparents could work a summer job to pay for their entire year of tuition.
Yeah.
And you and I work a summer job and we'll pay a fourth or fifth of what our tuition fees is.
If you're even doing that, because you're deferring the payments for student loans until after, in most cases.
Right. So you're not even making payments on it.
You're just living.
And honestly, as soon as you start making it's unwise to start making payments while you're in school, because once you start making payments, you can't stop.
Oh, dang.
That like starts the clock and it's like, no, you got to keep paying.
See, I didn't know that. I got a student loan towards the end of my college time. And so I was on a scholarship for a little bit and I exceeded the limit because I was at school forever. I basically just lived at the university for 6 years. Mm-hmm. Don't do that, everyone. That's a stupid idea. But for the last year, I needed to take a student loan out. And I don't know if I did it through the government or not. And I'm not sure if this is similar with everyone, but what shocked me is I got approved for the loan and then it was just like in my bank.
Yeah.
And so there was no like necessity that I actually went and used that on the school.
There's no accountability.
It was just like, okay, now I've got $10,000. You know what I mean? So it was,
there's also no way of teaching you. Like, let's say you needed, so as a student, let's say like you've decided, I don't think I can juggle a full-time school load and work. And so maybe I decide to take out more than what I need for school so that I can pay any sort of like maybe gas.
Yeah.
Those things. Maybe I pay my own cell phone bill, my car insurance. They don't teach you how to budget in a way. They're just like, well, the max you could take out is like $25,000. So how much of that do you want?
Yeah.
And then you're like,
Well, also, isn't there something about like student loan debt where like you can't get rid of it by filing for bankruptcy?
Correct.
So it's like,
it follows you.
So if I'm just saying, if I'm like an evil capitalist and I'm just like looking to make money, then that's like the safest bet possible.
Oh, 100%.
It's like, you know, you're basically like, hey man, as long as you're still alive, I'm getting that money.
And so that's the only way you get out. Death is literally the only way that you get out of paying your student loans. If I die, my student debt disappears. It is not the responsibility of my family to pay off my student debt.
Yeah. Well, it's just crazy. But that brings me to my next one of, I think the modern day universities are overhyped. Like going to college and getting a 4-year degree, I think that was a narrative that we were kind of sold when we were younger.
For
and
decades.
Yeah.
For decades. And for decades, it was true. Like my grandpa had so much more pay potential or upward mobility in his pay potential because the amount of people that had a college degree was much fewer. And so it was more valuable.
Yeah.
And then you're right. For decades, counselors at
it's
schools
like
and
super
parents were like,
saturated
no, if
and-
you want to be someone, if you want to have opportunity, if you want to do better than me, you have to go to college.
Yeah, and I still do think there's a need for specialization. There's a need for higher education. There's a need for people who, just want to be research, scientists or
Right.
doctorates.
Like for instance, the engineers building our bridges, I want them to actually be qualified and trained.
or the physical therapists that are
Yeah, whatever.
they're going to be like primary care.
No, totally.
But-
I want our doctors to actually have gone through rigorous training because they've got people's lives in their hands. Same
Yeah.
thing with our engineers making any sort of infrastructure.
Yeah, and I don't really have any, qualms against people going to the university if they feel like they really would benefit from it. I just think most people have just kind of assumed that that's what you do. That's just what you do to be a functional member of society is you go get a 4-year degree. And we put all this hype on being quote unquote educated. And there's so
and
many
well-rounded.
classes. Yeah. And there's so many classes that you take in college that are just regurgitating high school material at like a slightly higher level, which isn't necessary. Like you could do that in high school, but
so
it doesn't fit with the overarching goal of universities today, which I would argue.
This is the part of higher education that I think is a scam.
Yeah.
In that they force you to take 2 years worth of gen eds, which may or may not relate at all to what you're actually studying.
Yeah.
And so I was a psych major. I could, because of the material I actually needed to get my psychology degree. If you take out the gen eds and the minor, like I was required to declare a minor or a second major. If you take out all that, I probably could have gotten out of college in a year and a half.
Yeah, that's crazy. Especially because that what that means for your student loans.
Yeah, I was lucky in
tuition.
undergrad that I was on an academic scholarship, and so, but in a lot of cases, I mean, I genuinely think that the whole you have to have 60 hours of gen eds or whatever it is a scam.
Yeah,
that's 100% a scam because you're not getting well rounded by taking college algebra and taking cultural anthropology. And
I can understand like if I want to leave open. Here's where I land on this. I want to leave the door open for people who are like, I have no idea what the heck I'm doing, man. I'm just coming here because that's what I'm supposed to do. And I'm hoping to find like my purpose, whatever. Like go to all of the classes you need to figure it out. Like just know that you're paying for that. And there's no one-to-one relationship between I'm taking this class and therefore now I'm more prepared for a career. I'm more educated in this space. Like unfortunately, I think, and maybe this is a real hot take, but I think, unfortunately, the real problem with education now is that it has become so commercialized that the primary purpose of education, or I should say of universities, is to produce graduates and to increase retention or to increase like the amount of, I was going to say new recruits.
like enrollment, increase enrollment.
Yeah. So, and in a just basic sense that's perfectly okay, right? In a sense that you're like, I want to keep growing the university. I want more people to come and learn and stuff. But when you're spending like $45 million a year on your athletics and program, like I really have problems like taking that and looking at the rest of your institution and seeing the disparity between the pay gaps there and the resources allocated. I have a problem looking at that and be like, yeah, you are a higher education or an institution of higher learning. It's like, I don't really think learning is what you really value.
I think it's difficult to make that argument, at least in D1 schools though, just because I think the $45 million that they spent, I honestly think that sports programs in D1 colleges are probably largely self-sufficient.
Do you think so?
Do you know what I mean? Like
Or
they
like
make
that you're making all
so
the
much
money
money off of football. Like the U of A makes so much money off of ticket sales for football games, concession stands, all the gear that they sell, that honestly, I mean, I don't know this for sure. We'd have to look at the books, and it's a state-funded school, so technically we probably could. But it's either boosters supplying that money or the
Well, for sure now,
money
because the
that
name and
they've
likeness.
or the money that they've gained through the sale of, or just putting on the events.
Yeah.
So I could be wrong about that, but
No,
that's kind
I
of my
mean,
suspicion.
Yeah, and
Like
I
that
think
the reason they're not spending $45 million on a new engineering department is because, well, the engineering department
doesn't make any money.
It makes money to the extent that, you know, the tuition of the students that are engineering majors, probably their money goes toward that. But
I think like, and that's a really good counterpoint. And I think that is true, that and probably the top.
Yeah, we're talking like SEC schools.
Yeah, like I don't even know if it would be the top fourth,
schools.
because there's hundreds of colleges.
I would argue that, you know, your Mountain West schools, your like Sunbelt Conference, that certainly is not true of. I wouldn't expect that to be true of those schools.
Yeah, and I think the general difference, though, like if you were to look at, say, you know, University of New Mexico, where I went to school, and University of Arkansas down the street, those are drastically different programs. One is in the SEC and has a lot of, like, you know, clout and following. Even though we're not a very successful program, there's a lot of like reason to believe that they are regaining or recouping some of the funds they're investing into it. Whereas at the University of New Mexico, it was nothing like the environment here. Like, you would go to a game for free because everyone's giving away their tickets. Nobody cares about their teams. And nobody's like jazzed out of their mind when they meet an athlete, because it's like, dude, look at where you are. Like, the good athletes go play in the SEC. You know what I mean? Like, they go play in the Big Ten. Like, this isn't, you're not there. You're not him. You know, so even the treatment of athletes was different. Like, the whole environment it just didn't have the same kind of entertainment value, the same kind of respect. And I say that to say that you could probably still look at the difference between the coaching salaries and the professors there, and it would still be insane, because I'm going to speculate, right? But like a general broad brush statement, all the other smaller schools are trying to be like those big schools. They're trying to be like you know, the USCs, the Dukes, every big, you know, athletic organization that's putting out teams that are successful at a high level. They're all trying to be that. And I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. And I think it kind of like splits your allegiance, where there's nothing inherently educational about sports at a high level that you couldn't achieve without it being its own enterprise, right? Like, I don't think there's anything, I guess to put it a different way, I don't think there's anything necessarily unique about a school sanctioned sport versus a sport that's just like a club team. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, the difference obviously is there for the purposes of how schools operate now. But what I mean to say
state
is like
funding too, right? Because you'd imagine in smaller schools, it's still going to be like those sports are primarily going to be funded by like state dollars, right?
Yeah, I mean,
like
I'm not sure
dollars.
what the breakdown is in terms of how it's funded. I'm almost positive that all of these schools are having similar
or federal
discussions
funding,
I mean, I'm almost positive these schools are probably having similar discussions that, you know, professional teams have, where they're like, hey, it might not be in like a grant necessarily, but it might be like a subsidy, or you know what I mean?
So to go back to something that you said, to any like young listeners that may be listening to this, I didn't go to a D1 school. I went to Arkansas Tech, and I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted to study. Now, what's funny is that I didn't end up being a psychologist, but my education ultimately probably cost somewhere in the neighborhood between $30,000 and $40,000 for all 4 years, because I went to a smaller school that was cheaper. If you are going into college and you don't know what you want to do, I think it's like, go take some community college classes, because it's so much cheaper.
100%.
And it won't matter if your experience is like, let's say you are like dead set, I need to graduate from the U of A. Perfect. Go to community college and get your gen eds out for a cheaper rate. You can still borrow money from the government if that's your thing. I don't know if you have as much access to scholarships and stuff like that, but then you just transfer, and then you end up graduating from whatever school you transfer to.
Yeah. I think that's like a really
And if it turns out that college isn't for you, then guess what?
There's also
only
like
paid for a year or two or whatever.
With certain community colleges, I think this is more common in the past like 10 years, but with the advent of all of the technology we use now and all the jobs that it requires, there's a lot of like accelerated programs that you can take
Yeah.
that are basically turning your college experience into like a technical school. And I would say that like, aside from all of my random rambling that may or may not be coherent or valid, I do think there's at least one valid thing you can take from what I'm saying, which is that you don't need to go to a 4-year degree school to get a degree for a job that you're not sure you're going to do. And if it all makes sense, a technical vocation or a school for a technical vocation that's maybe a 2-year school is perfectly legitimate. And I know some guys that went to school for, I work with some guys that have gone through accelerated programs, essentially like boot camps for coding. And then I also know some guys back in New Mexico that went through technical school for, it was like aviation or aviation mechanics.
Yeah.
And so they got a really good job. Like after 2 years, they're making like 70 grand working for
and
like.
And the debt to income ratio is probably minimal compared to what you may spend on, for instance. So like my wife was a hospitality tourism planning major, which essentially means you could work at a hotel, you could work for a theme park. You don't need degrees to do that. In fact, I don't even know that those like jobs care if you have a degree in those areas. Like you could just work your way up in like the hotel business or something like that. So there are plenty of degrees where it's like it really wasn't worth paying what you paid for school
and I do
for the
think
job that you got, because you didn't even need that degree to do that job.
And I do think like corporations are maybe give you a leg up in this regard, because let's say you're not quite sure and you go to work for some corporation, you find a part of the company that you really love and you're just jazzed and you're killing it and this is your thing. I think a lot of corporations are good at offering some sort of supplemental help, or I don't know if you want to call it scholarships or whatever.
Oh, sure.
To help you go to school and get the degrees you think are going to help kind of excel or help you excel in the role that you're in. And so that can be a more linear path and still pursuing higher education, but having it with a very strict purpose that also lets you do that at a pace that's probably more realistic for also working. You know what I mean? So I think those are legitimate ways of maybe, because like you're right. Maybe you find yourself in a particular market where there's not like maybe a whole lot of specialization or a need for you to have a degree, but maybe you're working your way up and the company's like, yeah, we would pay for you to go get this degree and it would help you move up the ranks. It's like that could potentially make sense for you. I mean, there's always strings attached. But
and of course, I'm not necessarily saying that getting a degree in those hospitality industries isn't purposeful, but like I would imagine if you were going to really make waves in those industries, you're probably someone that's looking to get your MBA or something like that.
Oh, I see
what I mean?
Yeah.
But like if you're just like your whole plan is to graduate college with a hospitality degree and then just go right into the workforce, I just don't think you needed
scratch.
Yeah, I don't think you needed to invest that much time and money.
Yeah.
Comparatively, like you could probably have worked your way up in 4 years of working in that industry rather than going to school for 4 years.
Yeah, that makes sense too, because if you took the same two people and they're both starting from the bottom and working their way up, there's probably not a ton of advantage, like the opportunity cost of the time you're not working there, assuming you weren't working as you're going to school and getting your degree. Like in that 4-year span, someone could work pretty far up a chain if they started in the same position.
I definitely think so.
Yeah, I could see that as being a deterrent maybe for those specific scenarios. But yeah, I don't know. I that's why I think that not everyone should go to 4-year school.
Yeah, I agree. But I also think that that's just I think that's a failure of our public education system too, is that my high school counselors didn't talk about any other options.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially the two options we all thought we had was, or I guess I should say 3 options. Get a job at McDonald's as soon as you graduate high school, go into the military, go to college.
Yeah.
I had no idea that we had a tech school here in Northwest Arkansas. It's called Northwest Technical Institute, where you could go to it.
This is the first time I'm hearing this, bro.
It's in Springdale. You can go and like I don't know what all they offer, but it's a tech school, so you could, start your education on becoming an electrician or a plumber or a carpenter or something like that, and like apprentice under someone. Maybe your technical like classroom training only lasts like a year or something. I don't know. I'm not speaking educatedly on this, but you're getting on the job experience as you're getting your education. It's much cheaper, and you're going to be, if you're getting on the job experience, you're probably making money.
Yeah.
While you're getting your training.
Yeah.
And so I mean, our public education system needs to come to the realization that, number one, college is not for everyone.
Yeah.
Just on a simply like how people learn and what people's passions and skill sets are. And number two, having a college degree doesn't necessarily mean anything to anyone unless you are actually cut out for the field in which you got your degree in, which I'm going to argue is primarily going to be your STEM fields.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, yeah, I don't really have too much to add to that. I just think that like the overarching issue that you've brought up is more of like maybe why I started rambling about athletics and stuff is just that the idea of education that we are pursuing is primarily like a commodity. Like it's just like it's the difference between you like homemaking your hamburger and you've got like, you're grinding your own meat, you're getting your bread, you're making your own bread, you're growing your own lettuce and tomatoes and you're slicing it fresh. You're going through all the work and learning what that's like versus I'm going to go to McDonald's and I'm going to get the exact same thing I got like 3 days ago. And it's going to be a double cheeseburger and it's got exactly the same things. It's all frozen food. Like there's just this mass produced, manufactured. That's what education has become for a majority of us. And I think we kind of deep down inside we are aware of that, but we just don't have any good solutions. Like there's not, like you were saying, like you talk to your counselor in high school and they're like, I mean, just do nothing. I don't know. That's not really a good counselor, telling you to just like.
Not that I necessarily expressed interest in anything else, but I mean, you can imagine that there are certain people in public school that counselors and teachers could probably recognize pretty easily. Like, yeah, you're good at being a student. You're good at the classroom education thing. Yeah. And so you probably are the person that ought to be on the college track versus like, I don't know, if public schools in like grade school and high school actually took serious classes like ag classes, your shop classes. Like I took a class called small gas engines. It literally, the entire class was, we watched a video on this dude sporting this Briggs and Stratton mowing engine, and we just sat there and watched this dude take it apart and put it back together in the classroom. And then we had these engines that didn't even have all the parts to them. And the whole assignment for the class was to take it apart, put it back together. I learned nothing from that class. Nothing.
I thought you were going to come away with saying like you learned so much about engines.
No, I'm saying that's what I'm saying. Like if people are adept at like if they're mechanically, I'm not super mechanically inclined.
Yeah.
But if people are mechanically inclined, then like that's the extent of what their education.
Garage.
Shut up. Shut up. But like that's the extent of the mechanical education you're going to get at the high school that I went to, at least 13 years ago.
Sure.
And so it's like, well, shoot, you didn't really help them set them up to realize like, oh, I'm pretty adept at using my hands in this way. And that's what I should invest my time and money in, is getting training and education for that, because there was one class available, right?
Well,
and maybe they took it.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot more to be said about this that has to do with the stigmas around manual labor. So for instance, you mentioned being an electrician, or I know like a big one is like being a plumber. People are like, I don't want to be a plumber. But actually, while that work is really hard, they're always in demand and they make 100%. Good money.
They do.
And so I don't know, when it comes down to doing meaningful work and making a good career out of it, I think there's been a period of time where like manual labor was kind of shunned as like a less skillful job. And we're seeing now the resurgence of a lot of it because people are like,
I think that's probably true if you are just like doing unskilled labor.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But plumbing and like electrical work and carpentry, like that's certainly skilled labor.
Yeah.
You know, like
Well,
if
even
someone like
building-
it's the difference between installing the electrical panel in my garage versus being the guy that dug the trench to run the electrical wire in. You know what I mean?
Or to know that like how you're installing that panel is up to code. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like there's a whole element of it where like that's their job to know exactly what distance they need to be from
Yeah,
things
for
and
sure.
stuff.
For sure. So I think that in those regards, like that's a very technical and educated field. I think probably where the manual labor still is looked down upon is something that's unskilled, like being the person that dug the trench with a shovel, not like the guy that's operating heavy machinery.
Sure.
Because even that is skilled labor, right? And so it's just like the stuff that like anyone off the street could do without any training, really.
Yeah. Yeah. True story.
Yeah.
I don't know. I could keep rambling about
too,
it.
me
I would
too.
say, in addition to what I've already said, so don't go to a 4-year if it doesn't make sense. Go to a technical school if it makes sense. And I'd also say, like, when it comes to understanding education, I don't want everyone to say, like, or I don't want listeners or watchers, whatever, to think that I have nothing good to say about education. I just think it's one of those things where it's always going to be what you make of it. But I think in general, people are kind of conditioned to accept education as like more of a mass-produced thing. So you would be an exception. People like you would be an exception. People who go for extended education, graduate degrees, doctorates that pursue research fellowships, the whole thing. Like they're different type of people that have found their way into a type of or a segment of the population in higher education that are like really doing stuff. You know what I mean? Like they're really learning, they're really applying their education. They're really growing in that field or contributing meaningfully to that field. I got a psych degree. I'm not contributing to the psych field.
Right.
I'm probably 90% of the people that come out of the school that settle for an undergrad in psych are probably not contributing to the psychology field in any meaningful capacity. They're probably disregarding that degree's specificity to just be some general manager role at a retail store or whatever, it could be whatever,
No,
but
I
it's just
agree
not,
with
there's probably very few psychologists or psychiatrists proportional to the amount of people that go to school for that undergrad. That's just an example where I would say we're doing these things, we're going through these motions, and we kind of know in like a subconscious way that I'm just getting my degree. And there might be some elements of it that really kind of get you fired up and you get excited about. But I think the people that have the best experiences in education are the people that make it more than just that basic experience of just getting the degree.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
So that's where I would land on all of the rambling or the ranting.
On a less serious note, my next hill that I die on is car manufacturers need to stop putting in the auto start stop button. The auto start stop feature, total waste.
You're talking about like when you're driving, like you go to a stop,
and you stop at a red light and then your engine shuts off. So also it seems totally arbitrary when it decides it's going to shut off, because I might be sitting at a light for like a few minutes and it never shuts off. And then other times I approach a light and the second my car comes to a complete stop, it shuts off. And then
I've never understood because I thought
within
like
5 seconds, the light's green and I need to let off the brake and then it starts up again. And I'm like, what was the point of that?
Yeah.
You didn't save. There's no way you saved as much gas shutting off and turning back on in the 5 seconds if you just idled.
I'll fully acknowledge that I don't know cars. So let me first say that.
Me too.
There might be some
illogical.
really smart reason, but I always thought that like the amount of energy expenditure to start the vehicle is like some of the highest.
That's what I thought.
So
That's what I would think.
It just doesn't make sense. It's like you're just flipping the switches over and over.
So one thing that I had heard is like in, I might have this backwards. Maybe this is wrong. But I think what I had heard is like in diesel vehicles, it's smarter to let it idle than to shut it off and start it again. Like if you're just running into the gas station, for instance. But maybe in gas cars, it is more. If anyone knows more about this than me or Matt, feel free to educate us, because I love to learn.
We need to go back to the mechanic shop.
But it just seems stupid, okay? It's such a pain in the butt to like, I don't know.
Do you ever feel like...
Because there have been times where my car didn't restart. Like it tries and then it just doesn't fire. And then now I'm just stuck in traffic.
Awkward.
Yeah, stuck at a light.
You know what I was thinking though, is being kind of embarrassed about like pulling up to a stop sign and there's people like gonna walk by and then you like stop and your car turns off and they're like waving for you to go and you're just like I gotta, you know, and then it's like just the embarrassing moment of like the half second where you're like, I'm sorry, this isn't how this is supposed to go. You were supposed to walk.
That's funny. Okay, so there's another two that I know that we have that I think mine is going to mesh well into. I think you'll be able to take over after this.
Sure,
but
dude.
one big thing that I feel is the best animated trilogy of my lifetime, of our lifetimes, How to Train Your Dragon. 100%
Okay.
beautiful masterpiece. There's absolutely zero things, in my opinion, wrong with that trilogy. Okay, so
Can you name all of the movies?
How to Train Your Dragon, How to Train Your Dragon 2, How to Train Your
really
Dragon 3.
Oh, dang, that's awkward. That speaking of
There's
embarrassing
probably
moments,
subtitles.
that's what I was wondering. I was like, how much do we know?
But here's the thing. They're remaking How to Train Your Dragon into live action, and I think that that's stupid. That movie trilogy is already so good. Why do you need to try to recreate it? There was nothing wrong with the first one.
Yeah.
What do you need to recreate this one for in live action? Which
Well,
fleshes well into what
yeah.
one of your points was. But
One of mine is that movies are generally uncreative nowadays. Also commercially just mass produced, rehashing. But, you know, here I'm torn on this particular take because on the one hand, I totally agree. When I watched Mufasa, or not Mufasa, I'm sorry. When I watched The Lion King, the live action one, I was just like, why? Like,
yeah.
The whole like faces of lions, they just didn't have the same kind of emotive expressions and stuff. And so it was hard to feel the same weight and all these really emotional parts of the movie that in the cartoon, it's really easy to convey. So that kind of irritated me. And I thought that was terrible. But I watched the Mufasa movie recently with the kids and I was like, actually, it's kind of growing on me.
Is it?
The half human lion faces are kind of growing on me, and the songs were better in the second one, or I guess in Mufasa, I think, than.
But in a sense, that's kind of an original tale. I mean, Mufasa, that movie is an original tale. It's based off of
That's true.
something in the past, but it's not like they don't have all the content right there in front of them. Someone had to dream that up.
Yeah, that's
recently.
True. That's true. So and like a straight crossover 1-to-1.
So from what the trailer
trash.
of this live action How to Train Your Dragon is, they literally put shot for shot the animated one to the live action one.
And
it's literally like the same.
Looking away to touch the nose.
And I'm like, that is stupid. Why do we feel like we need to adapt from this well animated with, honestly, the animation style is good. There's nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah.
And then we just were like you're basically just proving. When you put those two right next to each other, it's the exact same thing. You are proving my point in that it's unnecessary because you already did it right there.
Yeah. Well, I think you're bound to encounter this with movies that have a very strong foundation. Because, like, I think ultimately, if you're the one funding the movie, you're just doing the math and you're like, listen, even if this is derivative trash, it's still going to be like a $500 million first day box office, you know what I mean? Because of how many people watch the first one or whatever.
And I think I might be wrong about this, but I think this is DreamWorks' first time doing this.
Oh, okay.
And so I think that they've just adapted this Disney model where Disney decided, hey, we don't need to be creative anymore. We'll just keep making these cash grab films because guess what? We did Beauty and the Beast and it's actually people.
Yeah.
We did Cinderella and it's actually people.
And I think my take on the stuff of like movies not being very creative is that what I mean to say is not that people are creating more movies. I think there's tons of movies. And I think that there's a lot of like quote unquote original stories and stuff. I don't really have a problem with people trying to make movies and express themselves and be creative. I just think the golden age of movies was like when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. That's kind of
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, like Jurassic Park, like a genre defining movie that didn't matter if you were into dinosaurs, you were going to see that freaking movie. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of like one of those movies that just aliens, you know, these type of movies that are so impactful. You're left kind of like Star Wars, maybe even like the first few, you're just sitting there like, how do they do this? Like, how do they think of this? Like your experience at the movies was probably, I mean, I say probably because, you know, it's like anachronistic. You're looking back and just like speculating on like what everyone was thinking. But I do think the experience of going to the movies and seeing these like brand new films was just completely different than today, where a lot of times it just doesn't have the same weight. And that could be because of the whole COVID thing and people streaming and movies aren't as popular. There could be a lot of factors.
Do you think, like, is there any you can think of the last 5 years that you think are as pivotal or groundbreaking as some of the ones you listed?
Pivotal or groundbreaking?
Yeah, something that you're like, no, that was creative and that was meaningful and that's going to define like this generation of film.
I would say that, let's take Jurassic Park, for instance. So I would say that's a 10 out of 10 movie, and it's doing all of those things. It's doing all the things. Has there been a movie that's had the same level of impact as Jurassic Park? No, I think 100% not. I don't see anything.
At any point in time? Like, you think that Jurassic Park is like peak film?
No, I just think there's been other movies. There for sure have been other movies since then, but I'm saying like the last 4 years.
Oh, okay.
I can't think of a single movie that would really check all the boxes. But maybe not even the last 4 years. I would say there's even a close one. But I had in mind like Interstellar. Like what I'm thinking of is a movie that is so good at taking advantage of the medium that it like transports you into a different. You know, like you're so engrossed in the story that by the time the movie's over, you're like, wow, what an experience. Like, I don't think that's very common. I think a lot of stories are superficial and shallow because of the safety of it, right? If I just create another Marvel movie, there's less risk if I can make it enough, like if I can get enough appeal for it to just piggyback on all the actual good Marvel movies. You know what I mean? So, I don't know. I guess I'd have to look at the exact dates to see what movies fall in the time range, but I can't think of any off the top of my head where I'm just like, wow, it's revolutionary.
Okay.
Does that make sense what I'm saying?
No, for sure. Would you consider Interstellar like a revolutionary? I actually had some problems with Interstellar.
Yeah. I wouldn't say it's, I would say it is a fun one to think about. As a sci-fi, I think it did a good job of trying to take advantage of the medium of like the crazy CGI and the trippy kind of experiences they have on the different planets or whatever. Like I think those kind of things are where I think it shines. And like one of the hardest things to do, I would say, in any movie is time travel. Like it's always just like, it's like a paradoxical thing. How do you even represent that? And the way they did that in Interstellar, where it had this kind of grid-like system that was supposed to be representative of space-time, like I thought that was freaking awesome. So that's kind of why I would rank it up higher.
No, I think it was definitely compelling. The place where it really lost me, the biggest issue I have with Interstellar is this concept of like the thing that transcends all dimensions is love. And I'm like, well, love is an emotion. So you could also say the same thing about disgust, hate, anger, nausea.
But people don't like that.
I know, but it's like, but you're trying to present love as this like, it transcends all dimensions and time and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's true about a lot of emotions, frankly. And so like to say that love is the thing tying everything together, like you're not making a good argument about why love is the most like impactful thing that transcends dimensions and time and space.
That's probably the weakest point of the movie, in my opinion, is that it takes itself really seriously. Well, I would say fairly seriously. And it tries to like explore these scientific themes that you'd expect of a sci-fi, right? That's not like blown in one's mind that they're trying to describe the difference in time.
Right.
And what it's like going through a black hole and stuff like that. Like those are really cool sciencey things that I think it tries to take seriously. But I would say the weakest part of the film is the end, where it's basically like, oh, love's what connects me to this person. What allows me to find this person in all the possible timelines. Like that's the weakest part of the film, in my opinion. And
well, I think it was so science fiction-y in a way that was like, yeah, I could believe that in some reality this could happen. That just broke it. Like that broke the expectation of like it
like
being
you're
a
either
legitimate
super into
science.
that, or you're like, I'm done with this.
Yeah. So an example of it's not a film, but a book that actually I thought was
exactly
like
what you're gonna say,
sci-fi all the way, like through and through, and there was nothing silly in that regard. That just like kind of broke down like the whole foundation it built up was Project Hail Mary. Which, if you haven't read it or listened to it, I listened to it on Audible. It's really good. It's by Andy Weir, the dude that wrote The Martian.
Yeah. Which is a good movie too.
It is a good movie.
Yeah.
But it's just like, you know, if you're going to set this whole premise and plot and story based on like hard, like mathematics and physics, like facts about physics and stuff, and then all of a sudden you're going to be like, but you know what's bigger than physics? Our love for one another. Like, that's so dumb.
Did you ever get in those movies? There was a documentary, I think it was called What the Bleep Do We Know? Did you ever watch that one? It was like, it's been so long since I've seen it, but I used to watch a bunch of those like out there documentaries, and that was one of them. And I think it wants to go into the kind of gray area of quantum mechanics and start extrapolating like all these super big meanings for life on the nebulous nature of quantum physics and the laws that govern that and how those are different. But it almost feels like that. It almost feels like a cop out where it's like, yeah, well, you know, the super complicated problem of trying to understand like how to communicate with his daughter in a different time, different place. Let's just say
all you had to do was love her.
Yeah. If you just love your daughter, this would never have happened. Honestly, there's probably a Reddit post right now that are talking exactly about that breakdown of Interstellar. It's like, TLDR, you better love your kids, or you're going to end up in freaking
because you're going to end up in like some weird like grid thing that you can...
What did they call it? Was it like a tesseract or something?
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so I do have one additional question. If this kind of spider webs us off into something else, that's fine. But like, so the big movie of like my teenage years, I would say was, or my early teenage years at least, was like The Dark Knight.
Yeah.
Would you rank that up as like being just as big of a deal to like the late 2000s, early 2000s? Because I think it was probably 2007 when that movie came out. Would you put that on the level of like the 2000s as like Jurassic Park to the 90s? Or do you think they're still quite
I could do that.
Incomparable?
Yeah, I feel comfortable doing that. Just like I would put Last Samurai up there too.
Oh, that was such a good movie.
Yeah.
People dog on it because they're like, you're telling me that some 30-year-old white dude is the last samurai.
You can't be having those white savior. It really is a white savior movie. Like,
it really is, 100%.
Think about how bad that is, though. I mean, nowadays, but it would just never fly.
So that's the thing is like, I think that you could change Tom Cruise's character. Now, the big thing with him was like he was a Civil War lieutenant, colonel, something.
Yeah, he's a colonel.
That like just was really disgusted by what the U.S. made him do, or perhaps what he allowed himself to do because of the U.S.'s excuses of war. And then he came to this culture that was like just viewed death in a different way and honor in a different way. And so I think that's kind of beautiful, but I don't necessarily think that the Civil War colonel is pivotal to that role. Like you probably could have taken a dude of a different racial background with a story from a different country and put him in that role, and it still have been just as meaningful because cultures are they can be so diametrically opposed sometimes. And
I think I understand what you're saying, but I would say in particular to that story, it is pivotal because it's so much of a dichotomy between Western values and what Japanese, valued at the time.
So what if instead it had been like I don't know, like a British colonial, or like someone that was big into British colonialism. I guess it's still a white dude, but it's not an American dude. At least.
It would be, I think it would be almost as effective. I think it would be very close, but I think the idea, especially as the way that they depicted it as someone who was in war, who was doing something similar in a different country, how he was then called to do it in a new country, and how this new country's ideals over time affected him. I think it helps like tell the story a little bit more coherently.
No, I agree. I guess my question is like, it's just so people wouldn't have a bad thing to say about the movie. Is there anything you could change just off the top of your head? Is there anything that could be changed about that movie that wouldn't make it feel like a white savior complex movie?
No, dude. 100% no. And here's what I would say is I think it's almost like Interstellar, where you go in and you're probably like in 30 minutes, you're probably either all in or you're like, this is not for me. And I don't think there's anything you can do to change that. People who go in to see stuff like Last Samurai or The Gladiator or whatever, and then within 30 minutes, they're like, this is cultural appropriation. I don't know what, like, there's nothing you can do at that point. I think it's either you view films in that way, or you view pieces of art in that way, and it's hard for you to look past it. And that's not to say like you always view something the same. Like there are certain things where I'm like, I don't really care for this style of movie or whatever. But like, I do think in the case of The Last Samurai, it's hard to get around the nature of the story. And the thing is that when you really start peeling away the layers of that story in particular, Last Samurai, it's like a white dude comes to this Japanese culture, and then spoiler alerts if you haven't seen this, because I know some people are so young, they're like, what's The Last Samurai? If that's honestly you, I'll just pause for a second and find your parents and brawl. Just have a brawl, because
yeah, I mean, the
everyone
only
should
thing
watch that
inappropriate
movie.
about the movie is that there's some gore.
Yeah.
But other than that,
I just mean it's a really good movie. Everyone should watch it. But
good choice.
What I was going to say is that it's hard to get around the beauty of the story and the very characters it chooses. So you have a white dude goes to Japan, basically becomes a samurai, and then he still doesn't like really save the samurai, right?
But so in that sense, it's not really a white savior complex.
But he's able to appreciate the core values of what being a samurai was, and then he tries to instill that into the emperor afterwards. In
so
like
I guess technically,
way.
he still like is pivotal in the emperor, like
and he's
remembering who he is.
And if you think about it, he's going to Japan as like a super broken dude
who, by the way, when he's captured by the samurai, like they hate each other.
Yeah.
Like Tom Cruise hates the samurai and the samurai hate him.
Yeah. And I think there's a scene towards the end where he has something inscribed on his sword.
Yeah.
And he talks about like the old and the new ways coming together.
Yeah.
And that's honestly the whole purpose of the film. And in a way, you could say it's a white savior because he's a white dude that tries to save this culture. But if you also think about it, like the culture saved him because he was in a place where he wanted to kill himself. He like
has all this peace afterward.
And so it's kind of that cool way of the story flowing out and maybe playing on that typical white savior idea, and then also having a unique end to it. All of those things together, I think, make it a really, really good.
Dude, this could be an episode. Like, not this right now, but like us just talking through like meaningful or impactful movies, personally or culturally.
For sure.
I do have a question. Okay. In the last 4 years, I think this one was in the last 4 years.
Throw it out there.
So I thought you really liked this movie, but you might correct me.
I might have just forgotten.
Everything, Everywhere, All at Once.
Ooh, yeah.
Okay. So I will say this. It was interesting. It was entertaining. I think I'm not big on like nihilism.
Yeah.
And so that I kind of was dismissive of it just from that, because nihilism is not what I believe about the universe. For sure. That one was just not as wasn't impactful at all toward me.
I would need to go back and watch it again, but I think it does a really good job of playing. It doesn't take itself seriously, right?
Yeah.
But it's really good at that. But then also there's a meaningful story it's trying to tell, and there's also these Easter eggs with googly eyes. It's trying to paint a picture.
About the googly eyes.
And so I think it does a really good job of balancing the serious and the unserious. I think it is a little bit too out there for a lot of people. Like Hannah wasn't that big of a fan.
Yeah, Desiree hates it. She did, like I kind of want to rewatch it just so I can analyze it a little more. But if Desiree's in the house, she won't watch it. She's like, do not put that on.
We'll have to rewatch it and just like have an episode dedicated to it, because I think.
Well, we could even just like split, because I love the movie thing. I think you and I do a pretty good job at dissecting like movies and shows and books and stuff. So that's always fun.
I vaguely remember like trying to understand some of the weird parts about it, and there was
like
some
hot dog fingers.
Yeah, but there was like some very specific things that the director was trying to convey, and I forgot all the nuance. But I remember coming away like appreciating that movie a lot for how it was done. But it is a weird one for sure. I would still not say that is up there with like.
I wouldn't say it was culturally impactful the way that like. I mean, honestly, the thing about The Dark Knight that people take away, and maybe it's just because Heath Ledger died, but it's his performance. Yeah. It's literally like that's the thing that people consider as impactful. Great story. Dark Knight has a great story, but really it all comes down to his performance of that role.
Yeah, dude. And I also think that like the depiction of Batman as being this edgy, like he's always been this rich dude and kind of mysterious. Mm-hmm. But I think in the older Batman movies with what was his name?
Well, it was George Clooney and Val Kilmer. I'm thinking of Clooney. The dude that was in the first Tom Holland Spider-Man. What is his name? People are gonna hate us.
I can't remember, dude.
But do you know who I'm talking about?
I don't. But what I was going to say is that I think it was one of the times that, because I've seen the older ones and it's been a long time, but what I distinctly remember being unique about The Dark Knight is the dark element of it, where he wasn't just a rich dude with this mysterious, like, kind of facet to his character. He was like a seriously jaded dude. Like, you know what I mean? It's almost like when you look at the dichotomy that's put between Superman and Batman, where Superman's like this upstanding individual and he's like the perfect guy, and Batman's kind of like this edgy.
Oh, are you sort of alluding to like the end where it's like he's the hero we deserve but not the one we need right now, where it's like he takes on this role of like, a lot of times maybe we see Batman as like this like emulation of goodness and like justice and stuff, but then he's sort of taking, in The Dark Knight, he's taking on this role of like, no, I actually like, I'm okay with people thinking I'm a bad guy.
Yeah, he's kind of like assuming the vigilante role that allows people to scapegoat him, and that's I think more consistent with what some of the comics depicted him as.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think that's also why it's really powerful, is because people are like, wow, that's what I always thought it would be. You know what I mean? Or maybe they're like, I totally forgot about this element of Batman and it's super powerful. You know?
Yeah. And that's actually interesting because there's not that element of like conflict with the police in Batman Begins that there is in The Dark Knight. You know, because that's kind of one of the big defining things of The Dark Knight is that the police are trying to capture and arrest.
Which makes sense.
Batman.
Right? That's like a sensible thing to do with some dude that's like tearing up stuff and...
Well, I might be wrong. Maybe Batman Begins did have a bit of that, because that was the big car chase scene, right? Was that in Batman Begins, or was that in, you know what I'm talking about? Where like he goes camouflage and like they totally lose him.
Oh, dang. Actually,
I think that was Batman Begins. Yeah, because that was the first time he got the crawler out.
Yeah.
Never mind. Forget what I said.
Yeah.
Movies.
Dude,
I love
real.
movies.
So what do we have left on our list, man? I've nothing but serious things left, dude.
Yeah. Hot dogs are a sandwich.
Oh my gosh.
Is
cereal soup? Are you gonna tell me cereal soup? Are you that guy? Oh my gosh. Get out of here, dude.
Okay, so
that's it for today, guys.
No. Define a sandwich for me real quick. If you had to give a general outline of what constitutes a sandwich, tell me.
A sandwich is something. I know I'm gonna define it, and immediately you're gonna be like, "That's a hot dog." It's something that has some sort of filler in between two pieces of bread.
Okay. Unconnected pieces of bread?
They can be connected.
Okay. That's what I was going to say, is that if you say that a hot dog bun is not two pieces of bread, then neither is any sandwich you get at Subway.
I mean, I understand where you're going with it, but I just feel like it's one of those things where if let's say I'm at a cookout, right? And someone's making hamburgers and hot dogs. And they're like, yeah, what do you want? Be like, oh, grab me one of them sandwiches.
Well, I mean, just because it has a specific name doesn't mean that it's not a sandwich. Like, but, yeah, if it's got a more specific name, I'm not going to call it.
Culturally, people don't think of it as a sandwich. So is it a sandwich?
Well, to be honest with you, like a lot of different sandwiches have names. The Reuben. But if I say Reuben, you're going to be like, yeah, that's a sandwich.
Yeah, but if you were making Reubens and I said, hey, give me a sandwich, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, but I don't think that you would be like, hey, well, okay, so how about this? If I've got ham sandwiches, turkey sandwiches, and a Reuben, and you say, hey, give me a sandwich, I'd be like, what are you talking about? You say, give me the Reuben.
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay.
I mean, I'm still going to like not ever call a hot dog a sandwich.
You don't have to call a hot dog a sandwich. I'm just saying.
I bet you're one of those guys that calls
GIF.
I bet you that.
No, are you kidding me? G makes a G sound. The G stands for graphic.
I know. It doesn't make sense. None of that makes sense. I didn't know if you were like an iconoclast where you're like, I've got to take the most contrary position.
Dude, I'm literally the dude that wants everyone to put the cart back in the hard corral. You think I'm going to try to...
Those are probably the same people that call hot dogs, bro. They'll always call them hot dogs.
I'm just saying categorically hot dog falls in the sandwich category.
Sure.
So I don't care if you call it, give me one of them sandwiches. Yeah. But you bring up you said cookout, and I really appreciate that you called it a cookout, because if you go to places like Colorado and they talk about like having a barbecue, they could just be talking about grilling burgers and hot dogs. But if you go to a barbecue in Arkansas, they're not serving in anywhere in the South, they're not serving hot dogs and hamburgers. They're serving brisket, pulled pork, ribs.
Yeah. Because that's barbecue.
I know.
No one
Because
ever gets
it's
a barbecue
it is a
hamburger.
style
I
of,
guess you could.
You can, but it's a style of, in that case, it's like, it's coming with barbecue sauce on it. That's what makes it a barbecue burger.
Yeah. Or you do some weird kind of combination. Yeah.
The last hot take, or not hot take, hill I would die on, is not super duper serious either, but Nickelback is actually a pretty good band. I think they've had some pretty like culturally impactful, and if not necessarily culturally impactful, like when you hear songs, it is very reminiscent of specific periods in your life. When I hear the song Photograph, it immediately takes me back to being like 11, 12, 13 years old. Even though that song came out before then, like it was constantly playing on the radio.
You're a child.
I'm trying to think of what else.
Dude,
Rockstar was a big song.
Yeah. Well, I actually listened to Nickelback when, the How You Remind Me song. I think it's like Sunny Side Up or something, Silver Side, whatever the album is called that is fun. It was one of the first CDs I ever got. And I didn't even ask for it, I don't think. I think my sister was just at like, I don't even remember the store is in the mall, but they used to just sell CDs and you would just go buy them off of like top of whatever. And she got me the Nickelback CD and Thrice's Artist in the Ambulance CD. And I listened to those all the time. And both of them were actually really good. And surprisingly, Nickelback's first, I think it was like maybe technically their second CD, but that CD with How You Remind Me is like surprisingly pretty hard. It's a pretty hard rock album.
Yeah.
But it's kind of funny because Hannah and I were driving to Hot Springs recently and we stopped to get some gas and some dude drove in with a motorcycle and he had like the speakers where he's like rocking you know what I mean? Because I guess that's just, you can't be louder, you know what I mean? Like
sure.
He's not satisfied with his motorcycle just being obnoxiously loud. Yeah, so he pulls in and he's rocking this music and I can't tell what it is at first. And then I hear it and it's Nickelback and I was like, this dude's like 80 years old, bro.
Even
just
bikers,
super old.
even 80-year-old bikers
Dude, I know.
love Nickelback.
But he came up with that look on his face like, I'm the baddest dude here. And you're just like, dude, all right, I'm going to give you a pass because it's Nickelback, but it's a very slim pass. It's a one-time use pass.
But you don't picture, like when I think of Nickelback songs, I'm not picturing like bikers, like tough biker dudes. Honestly, I think of like my oldest brother in an Abercrombie and Fitch t-shirt.
100%. A little bit of angst in there. Yeah, dude. That's exactly right.
That's funny.
I don't actually disagree with this take. I think Nickelback's a great band. Also, the drummer has really good beats. Like if you listen to a lot of his songs, he actually comes up with some pretty unique, like tasteful beats, I'd say. He's very skilled. Matt's a drummer, if you guys didn't know. So he's very interested in uniqueness in percussion. Yeah. Yeah, we've definitely gone over.
I think it'll be okay, man. Maybe we'll be interesting enough that people will be like, no,
maybe so,
don't limit it to an hour.
Please talk forever.
That's what overthinking is all about.
I know, dude. Well, that's it for today on Clearly Overthinking.
We hope you guys enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Bye.
Later. We got to figure that out, dude.
I know, our outro.
We got to like come up with a jingle.
Just say the same thing, like, thank you for listening to Clearly Overthinking.
Yeah.
And then you'll have like a little, like the intro jam.
I dig that.